Good morning, everyone. As part of the continuation of the previous part one, where the influencing factors of family environment on the psychological, especially the long-term psychological illnesses like schizophrenia and anxiety disorders and depression. So today we'll move on with the continuation as part two, focusing mainly on the expression of negative emotions, expression of these negative emotions and how it can cause as well as maintain the long-term psychological illnesses in the families. So before we move on into details of the kind of emotions and what are the different types of emotions and all that, I will narrate a small story and then we'll come back to the subject. Because since the subject is a little more abstract, a story can make a much more sense to the audience is what the idea behind this. So I am presenting a story which I will re-narrate in the light of the subject that I described during the process of this particular episode. Once upon a time, there is a family with a father, mother, 2 or 3 children. A family where they have a struggle in meeting the survival needs, but somehow the parent, usually the father, trying to meet the ends of the family needs, while still being a struggle to meet the needs of the entire family. In this process, there is the strained relationship between the parents because of not only the financial, because of the personality reasons, because of the hurt expectations from each other. All these things has brought in a significant strain in the relationship between the parents. Since the parental strain is becoming more and more complex as the needs of the family is being growing and the financial as well as the other emotional needs are not being met by the children. So the mother started sharing because there is an increased amount of stress and a feeling that it is becoming too much to handle, and then started sharing with one of the child, usually the elder child. And then as the child is being involved more and more into listening to the relational strain between the parents, the child started getting affected, becoming much more anxious and worried about the safety of one parent, and at the same time worried about the struggles of the other parent. So in this process, as they are moving on with their life stages, the elder child started getting involved into the marital relationship of the parents, and then started actually taking the role of the parent. Since there is a struggling parent and there is a suffering parent, so the role of protecting the remaining children is being taken by this elder child, intentionally or implied, for whatever reasons, with the support of the extended family. The parental role that is being carried out by the elder child has somehow managed and moved on along with the support of the other extended families, maybe grandparents. And then finally, all the children have moved on with their life stages and then settled well in their families, becoming adults and moving on with their own lives. So this story looks very normal, could be the story of many of the families. We'll relook at the same story in the light of the kind of emotions that are, the subject matter of today's episode, and then I'll re-narrate the same story towards the end of this episode. Coming to the subject matter of the expression of specific emotions by the family members and how they affect and maintain the psychological illness in a family member. Family being a primary unit of society has a role of not only giving love and affection to its members, but also has a role in helping them grow psychologically into a healthy individuals, and then become independent and able to move on with their lives as adults. However, family being the foundation, it also has an important role of creating psychological tensions that can be the ground for the psychological illness for its family members. So looking at some of the important emotions that are being identified over the decades research on how these emotions affect the psychological illness of the family members, not only in causing as well as maintaining them, and then in spite of the repeated treatments, still the symptoms being very active in some of 25% of the psychologically ill patients. So here mainly the long-term psychological illnesses like schizophrenia, depression and anxiety disorders, where it is identified that these emotions are having a major role to play in their maintenance of the problem. So one of the important emotion being the critical comments, the kind of unfavorable comments that the family members use referring to the patient, not specifically referring to the behavior of a particular situation, but referring to the patient, saying like, I don't like this, or it annoys me. These kind of unfavorable comments actually make the situation much more stressful for the psychologically ill person. So is it deliberate that the family members wanted to psychologically harm or hurt these people? Not necessarily. It is a way of coping mechanism or as a way of coping strategy that they are developing as a way of, when I critically comment, it is mainly in order to stop these objectionable behaviors which come as symptoms. Like if you take for example schizophrenia, there can be active hearing of voices of people that are not around, or the person might be having a significant fear of someone trying to harm them, or it can be sometimes like someone is trying to they're seeing someone whom the other family members are unable to see, and then high anxiety levels and aggression kind of destructive kind of symptoms which make the family members, or it rather disturbs the harmonious function of the other family members. And as a way of coping, these kind of negative emotions are being expressed by the family members, while critical comments is one of the coping strategies that the family members use as a way of controlling the behavior of this psychologically ill person. Usually the person who is going through the psychological illness, having exposed to these kind of negative psychological comments, usually have already having a low self-concept based on their age and the developmental stage, there can be an effect on, or it sometimes there can be a relapse in the symptoms. Relapse is something where after the recovery from the active symptoms through the psychiatric treatment or counseling methods, the person might have the symptoms reappeared again, which is referred in terms of a relapse. So critical comments is one of the important emotion that is expressed by these family members that can actually bring in a relapse, especially in schizophrenia. This is being found out that it is affecting, or it is being one of the important factor where there is a relapse of the symptoms all over again. The second kind of emotion that is being identified is the hostility. The hostility, that the negative feelings that are expressed on the person who is affected with this psychological illness, not in terms of a particular behavior, but referring to the personality of the person, and generalizing the patient's behavior, where these negative feelings are again is one of the important damaging kind of emotion that is being identified. Usually the hostile relatives feel that these patients are trying to be like deliberately indifferent, and then they feel that the family members feel that they are being the victims of the whatever the kind of illness that the family member is going through, they are being affected by the symptoms. So they usually consider themselves as being the victims, and hence as a way of coping they try to negatively express their feelings of anger, or feelings of their hostile kind of negative feelings onto the behavior of the instead of behavior, they actually generalize to put it into like you are a useless person, you are, or saying that you are a fit for nothing person. So these kind of negative way of expressing the feelings will also have a very negative effect on the illness, and not only on the illness but the relation between the ill person as well as the rest of the family members who are using these kind of hostile negative feelings as a way of expressing their frustration or strain in relation to the ill member. So coming to the third kind of negative emotion that is expressed is mainly the coming to the third kind of negative emotion that can have effect on these kind of psychological illness is emotional over involvement, where here the emotionally over involved family member uh, to the extent of a kind of self-sacrificing kind of a tone, and then there is a feeling that I have to be taking care of this particular person, and I am responsible for welfare of this uh, mm, family member, is what makes them emotionally over involved, and then it can also aggravate the problem. So these are the three kinds of emotions that are identified: the high expression of the hostility, high expression of the critical comments, as well as the emotional over involvement, seem to have a significant role in the relapse of patients of schizophrenia. There are two other important emotions that can act as a protective mechanism or protective emotions, that is expression of the feelings of warmth and affection, where here the family member considers that the psychologically ill person has a genuine illness, and then they are really going through a suffering, and then they are usually more affectionate, and then more calmer in their way of handling the psychologically ill patient as well as their symptoms. So the warmth or continuous, affection of or protection of these ill family members can be one of the protecting factor. And there is another important factor where which can act as a protection, that is again positive remarks. The person who is the family member who is taking care of the psychologically ill person, usually they try to give a positive way of appreciating the behavior of these patients, will usually in terms of accepting the person or praising the person for their efforts, and then trying to give them a positive kind of environment, is actually helping them to kind of cope with these symptoms in a better way. So the positive remarks as well as the warm feelings that are expressed by the family members can be like a protecting from the relapse, especially in conditions where there is anxiety disorders. It is considered to be more of a protective role rather than helping these clients in order to handle the symptoms as well as their life situations in a much more better way. So looking at what is this expressed emotion? Like I said, expressed emotion is a way of coping method, as a way of handling the stress of this, managing the psychologically ill person. So what happens when there is a psychologically ill family member? Usually there is a kind of disturbance in the entire family system, the developmental stages of the rest of the family members, as well as the kind of rituals that happens, the routine that happens, everything is centralized around taking care of the psychologically ill person. While the psychological ill person sometimes considered to be not contributing, or they are being lazy in spite of not having symptoms, since these kind of symptoms and also the side effects of these psychiatric medications make them a little more dysfunctional than their usual way of handling the routine, where they might be sleepy even in the daytime, not actively contributing to the family income, or sometimes they might actually uh, covering up or entirely because of the severe symptoms, like I explained in the beginning, where there can be a complete aggressive kind of outburst, or there can be a kind of high expression of these um, hearing these kind of voices as part of their symptomatology, and then feelings of someone harming them, we call them persecutory ideas. All these symptoms can completely shaken up, and there can be a shock, and there can be a kind of puzzled kind of environment, a confused kind of environment that the family members go through. So over a period of time, there can be a little bit of settlement, but still the long term, generally 25% of these psychiatrically long term diagnosed patients completely recover. 50% of them are usually moderately recover and able to flow on with their life stages, while 25% of them, in spite of all the medication, in spite of all the professional help, mental health professionals, doing regular counseling and then visiting, there can be a kind of a lifelong effect on them. So where usually these kind of high negative expressed emotions might become a part of their way of dealing with their mentally ill or psychologically ill relatives, and then over a period of time, these kind of emotions can bring in a long-term illness or maintaining these symptoms or bringing in the relapses. So this is something that in today's episode I wanted to share with you. We'll try to re-look at the same story uh, from the light of this subject, where I have narrated in the beginning. The story where I have narrated of a family will relook at again, keeping the kind of various factors that I have expressed in the part 1 as well as part 2. Relooking at the same story that I have narrated in the beginning of this episode, where keeping the kind of influencing factors as well as the emotions that I have narrated in this episode, we'll relook at how it can be looked from the psychiatric or psychological illness perspective, so that it can give you a better understanding. So the behavior that is considered to be very normal in inside the families might be looked at as psychologically ill when it comes to a particular client coming out, or the patient, or there can be symptoms or affected person coming out having psychological illness. The way that they are looked at the family factors is what that I am trying to give you a kind of simplified idea here. So relook at the story one more time. There is this family having with 2 parents and 2 or 3 children, where the family is struggling to meet the means by not only the financial but also the emotional as well as the psychological needs of the family. So where there is a significant strain between the parents, we call it as marital strain or marital discord, where one of the parent may be indulging in, or usually let us say the father is indulging in a kind of physical violence towards the other parent or the mother, while whereas the mother, being a kind of looking at herself as being the victim of this physical violence, might be sharing the will be sharing whatever her feelings that she is going through one of the towards the or to one of the children. This children, who is usually the elder children, elder one, usually getting involved into this marital discord of the parents, kind of being in a state of confusion, try to look at the situation in a much more over mature way, to more than the age is required, and then they start looking at it as mother being victimized, while at the same time trying to balance the father's, the kind of relation that they share with the father, trying to help the father in trying to kind of run the family, and a kind of taking a parental role or a second parent role, and trying to help the other siblings go through their developmental stages in more or less smoother way. Where here there is a, if you look at from the triangulation perspective that I have described in one of the influencing factor, where the mother and the elder child might be aligning together, and then trying to look at the father as a kind of a person who is destroying the family. And then this triangulation or this kind of alignment is bringing in a strain in the family smooth or healthy functioning of the family. So this is where the alignment is coming to picture, and the person who is considered, usually the mother, who is considered to be the victim of the physical violence or the marital strain, might over a period of time try to become a little more critical and express more hostile feelings towards the other parent, which is considered to be aggravating the um, family tension, while the child who is already involved into that, like a scapegoating, like we were also describing about the scapegoating, where one of the child is being involved into the parental discourse and then being scapegoated, is in a state of more confusion and a kind of withdrawal that happens, where they might try to go into a kind of depression kind of symptoms, or try to more try to take the role more than their age. They were trying to perform the role and then ending up into more a psychological kind of disturbance situation. So moving on, if the child is resistant enough or able to resist all these tensions, taking the parental role or a sub-parental role along with the father probably, and then moving on and helping the other siblings to kind of develop their move on with their developmental stages, and then uh, once at some point, while the siblings become more adult and independent, the role of the parent is questionable again, because there is no need for the parental role anymore. While the siblings have grown up and moved on, the elder child will be again in a state of confusion, and there is a lot of role confusion can come into picture. If the person is more resistant, can move on with the role and then try to figure out their own life and then able to move on. While this story looks like it has ended happily, the kind of emotional over involvement that the mother might be playing, or the kind of triangulation at some point, that the role given to the child as a parent, and at some point is completely negated, and then trying to bring in a point where your role is not required anymore, again confuses the elder child. If there are already family pathologies or there is a hereditary vulnerability, this can, along with this kind of family environment, can bring the child into a much more psychologically disturbed state of mind. So if we think that this ends here, like the kind of the patterns, that these maladaptive patterns can continue not only to the relationships that they are, or the family that they are restricted, it can move on with their extended families. Once the children become grown up and then move on with their own families, they not only carry their whatever the kind of possessions given or the kind of assets given by the family, they also carry all these personality characteristics of how they view the relationships in their family of origin where they are born and brought up, and the same patterns can continue in the new family units. So this is something that where it is considered to be looked at as the elder one taking care of the role of a parent, or along with the parent try to help the rest of the family members, especially the younger siblings, to settle down, looks very normal story. But if you look at deep into, if one of the family member is brought to a psychological help, then when we look into the family pathology, there can be these kind of set patterns of alignments and triangulations and scapegoatings, all those factors, and then emotionally over involving of one particular family member, or there can be a kind of hostility breeding over between the family members. All these will be the patterns that will continue to run in there, and then over a period of time they can become into a habitual patterns, and the family members may not even realize that it becomes their second nature. So this is how the various emotions and the pathological factors that can breed the psychological illness not only might end up in resulting in a psychological disturbance, but also maintain the psychological illness over period of generations. So hope this bit of information will be giving some idea about how the family environment is important. A healthy family environment is important. In the next episode, as an extension of the part 3, we will look into how the same family can help the psychologically ill person to come out of this suffering and help them to grow into much more well adjusted and able to adapt to their life stressors. Thank you so much.